Have you ever wondered what happens when a brand new 21st century idea smashes right into a wall of old 20th century laws? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. This is the story of a massive legal showdown between a motorcycle hailing app and the government regulators who wanted to shut it down.
But here's the thing. We're going to start at the end. This right here, this is the final word from the Supreme Court. Game over. The order that was letting Angkas operate got completely thrown out. So the big question we're going to answer is, how on earth did we get to this point?
All right, first things first, let's meet the main players in this fight. In one corner, you've got the tech disruptor, the motorcycle hailing app we all know as Angkas. And in the other corner, you have the government regulators, the LTFRB, and the Department of Transportation.
So what is Angkas? It's that app that lets you book a motorcycle to zip through traffic. Pretty simple, right? But here's the absolute kicker. When they launched back in 2016, they did it without getting the required government stamp of approval, what's called a TNC accreditation. And that single decision, right there, was the match that lit this whole legal bonfire.
The government's reaction was, not subtle. Their message was loud and clear: stop. From their point of view, Angkas was basically an illegal public transport service. They put out warnings telling everyone the service wasn't legit and ordered them to hit the brakes on their operations.
Now, when two sides dig in their heels like this, where does the fight go next? You guessed it, the courtroom. And this is where the story gets really interesting because we had two different courts look at this and come to two totally opposite conclusions. At first, it looked like a huge win for Angkas. A lower court, the regional trial court, gave them an injunction. Now that's basically a legal green light to keep operating. The court said, hey, they have a right to do business. But then, the government appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court didn't just disagree, they tore up the lower court's decision, calling it a grave abuse of discretion. Ouch.
So this is the million-dollar question, right? How could two courts look at the very same situation and see completely different things? What made the highest court in the country say the lower court got it so spectacularly wrong? To figure that out, we have to look at what the law actually says.
To really get the Supreme Court's logic, we need to wrap our heads around two key legal terms. This entire case, believe it or not, boils down to how you define what Angkas is actually doing. Okay, first up, public service. The law on this is super broad. It basically says a public service includes any common carrier that moves people around for money. And pay attention to that last part, serving a general or limited clientele. That's going to be really important in a minute.
And that leads us right to the next term, common carrier. The Civil Code says this is anyone, a person or a company, whose business is to transport passengers for a fee and who offers that service to the public. So you see how that connect? If you're a common carrier, you're a public service, and that means you've got to follow the government's rules.
So Angkas sees these definitions and comes up with a really smart argument. They said, hold on, we're not a transportation company at all, we're a tech company. Let's break down how they tried to make that case.
Angkas' whole defense was this. Look, we don't own the bikes. The drivers aren't our employees. Our app is just a tool, like a digital bulletin board, where a driver and a passenger can make a purely private deal. They argued that since drivers can log off whenever they want, they aren't offering their services to the general public in the same way a bus or a taxi does.
It was a very modern argument for a very modern business model. But the Supreme Court just wasn't buying it. Not at all. In fact, they pretty much took that argument apart piece by piece, using laws that had been on the books for ages.
The court leaned on old cases to make its point. They brought up this quote, which says that the law doesn't care if you're serving literally everyone or just a narrow segment, like, say, people who have downloaded your app. If you're open for business to a part of the public, you're open for business to the public. Period. So, in the end, the court looked past the fancy technology and said, let's be real. All this app does is make it easier to do something people have done forever: hail a ride. They saw it as just a virtual system for a very old business. Using an app to book your ride doesn't magically change the fact that it's still a public transport service.
So the Supreme Court's logic was actually pretty straightforward. It went like this. Step 1, public transport involves public safety, so of course the government can regulate it. Step 2, what Angkas does fits the legal definition of a common carrier. Step 3, there's another law that already says you can't use private motorcycles for hire. And Step 4, because of all that, Angkas had no clear and unmistakable right that the lower court should have protected. Boom.
So that's it then. Angkas is illegal, case closed, right?
Well, not so fast. This is a really important point. That huge Supreme Court ruling, it wasn't actually the final word on whether Angkas could ever operate.
You see, the court was only ruling on that preliminary injunction. The best way to think about an injunction is like a legal timeout in the game. It just freezes everything while the main issues get sorted out. It's not the final score. All the Supreme Court said was that Angkas didn't deserve that timeout.
And what that means is that the main event, the case that will actually decide if Angkas can be regulated and operate legally under a new set of rules, that's still waiting to be heard back in the lower court. The Supreme Court took away their temporary shield, but it didn't end the entire war.
And so this whole saga leaves us with this massive, hanging question that's so much bigger than just motorcycles. Yeah, the temporary order's gone, but the real debate is just heating up. As technology keeps leaping ahead of our laws, something has to give. So which will it be? Will our laws bend to catch up with innovation? Or will innovation be forced to squeeze into boxes that were built decades ago? That's the question still waiting for an answer.